So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the EMEA Recruitment podcast in partnership with our good friends over at Operation Smile. As my colleague Rose has mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Dorie onto the podcast today. So, hopefully, you can still hear and see me okay.
Hey, Paul. So glad to be here.
No, it's great to welcome you on the podcast. I know you're extremely busy and have a lot going on. So, to spend an hour with you today of your valuable time is really cool. So, really grateful to having you on the show today.
Back at you. I think we're all preposterously busy these days. So I'm glad you had me on. Thank you.
That's cool. And we've got quite a lot to run through, actually. And some of these questions have come directly from our network, some internally here from the business at EMEA as well. So I just, fly straight into them, really. And maybe one to start the podcast off, it's fairly lighthearted just to get the conversation going. I mean, as my colleague Rose and I've mentioned, the podcast is in partnership with the medical charity Operation Smile. So I thought I'd ask you really what the last thing was that made you smile.
Oh, that's great. Well, actually, one thing that has made me smile is this past weekend was Pride weekend in New York City. And so I went to a drag brunch and it's hard not to enjoy yourself when people are just going all out and lip syncing to Rihanna. So I think you would have to try really hard not to enjoy yourself there.
No, it's really cool being able to get out and do these kind of things again, because we've been obviously restricted for so long that it's just great to be able to get out and enjoy these types of events again, really. And I mean, I know a large part of the podcast we're going to be talking about your latest book release, but one of the things I wanted to ask you about really also was one of the books you've written previously. It's obviously focused quite a lot on networking and how to network in the right way. And I was having a conversation with someone last week and they were saying, obviously the networking events are starting again and they find it really nerve-wracking now getting back into that reality of going into a room of strangers. You don't know them, how to approach them in the best way, and what you should really do to get the most out of a network event. So I thought, I know someone who might know a good answer to this. So I thought I'd just throw this question at you. I know it's one of your, let's say, your older publications, but I thought it's still one you're an expert on. So I thought I'd just ask you really, if there's any tips you might have for people that are quite nervous now getting back into the reality, seeing people again, going to these events, what you pick out really as ways they can work through this nervousness.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. It is something that I've thought about a lot. I mean, above and beyond people being nervous about, COVID per se, I think that it's true that many of us just feel out of practice in terms of the mechanics of networking. And I also think that this presents a really useful inflection point for us to reevaluate how we've done it. Because I personally believe that a lot of how networking had been done prior to the pandemic was actually not that good. It was not that fun. It was not that desirable, and honestly, not all that effective. But we made ourselves do it because we had this ideology that, this is how it's done and I have to do it. And I think we actually are in a position where we can rethink it. I mean, specifically, so often, I spent a lot of the early part of my career forcing myself to go to these quote unquote networking events, which were just basically these mass gatherings of dozens or hundreds of people. They're strangers. You don't know them. Oftentimes they either don't have name tags or it's hard to see the name tags. So you're just sort of guessing. You're just randomly going up to people and being like, hi, person I don't know anything about in the entire world. Want to talk to me? Gosh, let's try to figure out something to talk about, which it's just inherently horrible. It's a horrible way to get to know people. But I would do it and I would make these little, goals for myself, like, don't leave until you've talked to at least 3 people. That's how you network. That's how you get your money's worth. And it's just ridiculous. And so I think that, I actually stopped. I literally just stopped going to events like that. I think they're a waste of time. And I found something better for myself. And I hope other people can as well. On the surface, it requires more effort, but actually it's better. And I think in the end, it doesn't feel like less. It doesn't feel like more effort because it's so much more enjoyable. But what that means is that instead of going to other people's dumb events where it's completely unfocused and just, like a total pinball thing, like what, you don't know if you're going to talk to anybody useful or not. You need to start organizing your own events. And, this might sound like terrifying to people, but really, when I say an event, it doesn't mean 500 people. It means it could be inviting someone to lunch, or it could be having a small dinner gathering of 4 people or 6 people or 8 people, but you invite them. And that gives you total control over who the guest list is. And it gives you total control over the format, which means you can do it better. You can actually bring together people that legitimately have something in common, that legitimately would like each other, would have something to talk about. And you will get to know them better, and they will be grateful to you because you are helping enlarge their network with like-minded people. That is the far better way to network. And I think if the more we think about doing that and taking some kind of proactive agency over it, the better off we'll all be.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a really great advice, actually. I mean, it is one of those things that, as you say, one of the nerve-wracking things going into a room like that is not necessarily, you may not be an expert in the subject matter that's coming up, and you might feel a bit intimidated by the people who know more about certain things than you do. Whereas if you create the event yourself, then you can control to a certain degree what the subject is and the conversations that are gonna come around, which is really good advice. And I think this probably links in a bit to your other books as well. About the entrepreneurialism and reinventing yourself. So it's very much around you being the center of something rather than being led by other people. I mean, is that typically the way you've led your own life, and these are kind of experiences that are coming into the books, do you think?
Well, I think a lot of us sometimes vacillate between having an ideology of, oh, I just need to be patient and good things will happen, versus, oh, I need to make things happen. Oh no, how do I make things happen? And it's like for all of us, I think there's sort of this tension of proactivity and passivity. But while it is true that there are certain things where you just can't force the timeline, in general, I think most of us recognize that we are far more likely to be able to get the outcomes we want, or at least come closest to the outcomes that we want, if we are more proactive. That's why actually in my new book, The Long Game, I talk about a concept that I call strategic patience, because I feel like, traditional patience has never been my favorite. It's so frustrating. And I feel like, honestly, when people give you the advice sometimes, whether it's a boss or a board member or even, your parents when you're growing up, oh, just be patient. Really what it means is stop asking about this. Shut up, just sit back and don't bother me about this. Maybe it will happen, but knock it off. And that's actually what it really means, I think, when it's delivered. And if you are somebody who wants to accomplish something in this world, you can't allow yourself to stop there. Now, it is true. You think about something like growing crops. I mean, no matter how fast you want the crops to grow, the crops will take as long as crops take, right? You can't speed it up, but it also means you don't have to be passive about this process. You can be researching crop techniques. You can be doing A/B tests and trying out, what's more effective, this or this. You can be collaborating with people and building partnerships. There's a million things that you could be doing to be more strategic about it and to nurture the process along. And so for me, strategic patience is really like that in our careers, that we recognize, all right, some things just are going to take a while, whether we want it or not, but it doesn't mean that we have to be passive. We actually can do things. We can make them happen. And so when it comes to something like networking, so many of us kind of implicitly somehow feel like, oh, well, organizing events, that's something that associations do, or that's something that other people do. Well, the truth is anybody can do it that wants to do it. We just need to step up and give ourselves permission. And I think that's one of the most valuable things we can do.
And I mean, I think that what you're saying here as well is you can look at, I suppose, your own career actually in this respect. I mean, you're very, proactive. You're doing so much over the years. I mean, wonder how you manage to fit everything in to achieve what you have. And I guess before we go into a bit more detail on the long game, I thought I'd just ask you a bit about how you've managed to achieve everything you have. I mean, it's one of these things. I know time management and trying to get a work-life balance and so on. They're probably phrases that have been almost overused, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. But it is always interesting, I think, for myself and for the network to find out really how you structure your time, how you focus on the key things, because you must have a lot of things that you that could distract you away from the key areas, and have a quite a disciplined approach to focusing on the things you want to do and the things you're good at. So I just wondered if there was some kind of something behind it, and how you tend to structure your time and day, really.
Well, one of the precepts that has been really helpful to me, Paul, is just recognizing that, I mean, everybody knows, like, oh, okay, don't focus on too many things. You can't have too many goals. Like, we all know that, right? But what is the practical application of that? And in my case, the way that I have distilled that common wisdom into hopefully something useful is really understanding that at any given time, you pretty much can't have more than 2 goals, maybe 3 if you're, really ambitious. But typically I prefer to have 1 personal goal and 1 professional goal that I'm working on. And to get specific, like, what this means is we all have a certain baseline level of what I will call maintenance activities. That would be servicing your clients, or answering your emails, or doing your taxes, or, just all the sort of like ridiculous necessary administrative things. In your personal life, it's like shopping for groceries or whatever. That actually takes a really large amount of time. And so what it means is that there is a very limited amount. I mean, let's call it, we're ballparking here. Let's call it 5% or 10% of your time that you have for discretionary activities. Almost all your time is taken with the regular stuff. So how are you going to deploy that 10% of time for discretionary activities? That is where the goals come in. And so I would say, if you're actually going to make meaningful progress on something, it's really got to be like one thing. So if you're, writing a book, as I was last year, when I was writing The Long Game, that's pretty much it. It's like you do your regular things and then you work on your book until it's done. And then when it's done, you can pick a different discretionary activity, but you have to be extraordinarily judicious about what that choice is. And at any given time, if somebody like has a pop quiz, like, well, what is it you're working on? You need to have a very good, clear answer about what you're doing, and therefore, by extension, what you're not doing. I'm curious, Paul, how do you think about it? What's your sort of best productivity technique?
Well, I mean, it's not, to be honest, it's not too dissimilar to what you mentioned, actually. I mean, I a few years ago, I read a book called, actually, The One Thing by Gary Keller. I don't know if you've ever read that, but it was something that really changed my approach to how I'm going to structure the day. And
the one thing, yes.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. And what I liked was also his thoughts on the work-life balance discussion, because sort of saying, well, really, you don't really want a balance in life. If you have balance, and it can be quite boring. The good things happen when you're at the extremes, but it's actually being really focused when you're in the extremes and just getting these things done. And so that was kind of a book that I've used really. So at the start of most days or most weeks, I've got the one thing I need to do today to then be more productive this week, this month, this year. So it all kind of links in.
That's great. Love that.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And I think, because obviously, being the prolific writer that you are, I think it must take, a good amount of time and effort, obviously, to write these books, and you need to be left alone for a good period of time, so it must be quite difficult, if you have friends and family calling you to say, right, okay, we're going out at lunch, going out for dinner, do you want to join? And then you have to say no to lock yourself away and get these books written. So it's got an incredible amount of self-discipline in that.
Well, admittedly, it took less self-discipline during COVID because ain't nobody calling. It was like, even if I wanted to be having lunch with people, nope, they did not want to have lunch with me. They are like, stay away.
That's it. But I think, you mentioned COVID there, and I guess it quite nicely brings a discussion about the current book around, because I think, one of the things we notice on the recruitment side of things as well is that, people want more quicker, whether it's a career or a whole range of other aspects of people's lives. Everyone seems to want everything tomorrow rather than playing more of the long game around these subjects. And I thought I'd just ask you a bit about where the drive to write the book came from, and if there are any really big takeaways from the book that you want the network to know about, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you're exactly right, Paul, that COVID sort of brought it into stark relief, because I started conceptualizing the book. I was writing the proposal for it and kind of coming up with the initial outlines for it in 2019. And it was obviously a pretty different world. It was still a world where a lot of people had a desire for short-term gratification. We all sort of dimly remember this time, right? Everyone's racing around. There's so much travel. There's so many meetings. There's, so much happening on social media where it's like, oh my God, like, why are they so successful and I'm not that successful? There's all this comparison. And that kind of creates a cycle of short-term thinking about, what am I doing wrong? I've got to fix it. I've got to grow faster. I've got to do better. And I think that can create pernicious patterns. But then, ironically, we get into COVID, all of a sudden short-term thinking, it's not even like we had a choice. Short-term thinking was all we could do. It was the only game in town, because no matter how, much we might want to do long-term thinking, it's like, well, no, man plans and God laughs. And it's just, it's all short-term all the time. And clearly that was valuable at the time. You did need to be agile. You did need to pivot. You did need to figure things out really quickly in times when things were uncertain and you didn't have full information. So it's not that short-term thinking is always bad. It's not. But what is bad, I think pretty irrefutably, is if all we can do is short-term thinking, because getting stuck in the rut of short-term thinking, which frankly is kind of easy to do, right? It's been working for me. Let's keep doing it. If you're just reacting, what it means is that you are never able to set the agenda. And you're just responding to what is coming at you. Now, this is not terrible, but what it does mean is that you are not necessarily able to steer the ship in the direction you want. You might luck out and sort of end up crashing into the shore that you want. But it's also possible that, you want to be sailing to Spain and you end up in Tahiti. That's equally possible, because all you're doing is just sort of riding the waves that are slapping at you. I think that most of us do have goals, whether it's for our careers or our personal lives. We have things we would like to make possible. And it really is only possible if we are exerting some degree of planning, of force, of will toward it. And that's where long-term thinking comes in.
So are you a fan of things like vision boards and those types of things? So you've got thinking 5, 10, 15 years ahead. Are those things you see value from?
So I'll see you and raise you. I think vision boards can be good, but there's something that I like even better. So the idea of like a vision board, you're sort of mapping things out, whatever, you're cutting out magazines and making a collage, and here's what my life is going to be like, and here's my mansion I'm going to have, and all these things. And it's great in the sense that it enables you to maybe get clearer on what your ambitions are. I love that. But where a vision board sort of falls short is that it doesn't necessarily tell you how to get there. It doesn't provide any views. I mean, yes, you've identified the goal, but I think a lot of people sort of stop prematurely, and they're just like, okay, well, I read The Secret. Now that I have the vision board, I will look at it every day, and then, magic things will happen. And, I certainly love magic as much as anyone, but I haven't found it to be universally effective. What I do like better is, yes, identify the goals, yes, get as clear on them as possible, but then find a way to work backwards from it. And let me explain what I mean. In my book, Entrepreneurial You, I profiled a guy that I first met about a decade ago. I was working on a consulting project, and he worked for the client. His name is Lenny Achan. And Lenny had advanced really quickly in this organization. He was 35 years old. He was the chief communications officer. And the crazy part was, this is pretty impressive anyway, a fast rise for this guy, but he hadn't even started in communications. This was a hospital system. He had been a nurse, and he had somehow transitioned from being a nurse to being the chief communications officer by age 35, which is awfully remarkable. Mm-hmm. And so I started to ask him questions and try to understand more about what he did. And he had a technique that I thought was so interesting. I actually ended up writing about it in an article for Harvard Business Review. He said, I'm like, Lenny, how did you get here? How did you have this very fast rise? And he's like, oh, gosh, it was really simple. I just pre-wrote my resume. I'm like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean, Lenny? Explain. And so what he did, which I thought was pretty cool, was every year he would update his resume, probably like a lot of people, but instead of updating it like, oh, let me see what I did this year and, keep it in accordance, Lenny would write his resume as though it were 5 years in the future. So if we're having this conversation in 2022, he's writing his 2027 resume. And by doing this, he's identifying not just what job he has in 2027, not just what his duties and responsibilities are, but also the jobs he would have needed to have in between here and there, so that he can actually basically identify the skills gaps. If he really wants to be in a certain place, but it's going to require him to know how to manage 100 people and speak Mandarin, or, whatever it is, it's like, oh, well, that's my action agenda. If, it enables you to say, oh, well, I need this training. I need this certification. I need to build up these skills. I need to meet these people and make these connections. So it wasn't just wishing, it enabled him to really strategize about his own personal development plan. And it was remarkably effective for him. And so for me, that's the yes and where it can get really helpful.
No, it's really interesting because you hear a lot of stories of people who take similar approaches to that. I know there's one about Jim Carrey, I think, wrote himself a check for, I think it was $3 million, knowing that at some point he was going to get that for being in the film. And then he got the role of Mask. And then, that's when he got his payout. But he had this check that he'd written to himself 10, 15 years earlier. And that was his sort of motivator to do it. And you see a lot of different kind of variations on the story. But ultimately, it comes back to what you were saying a bit earlier on. You've got to be proactive on it, and you've got to try and think more long term than just trying to deal with the things that come up in day-to-day life and get torn from pillar to post with other people's demands of you, really.
Absolutely, yeah.
I mean, is there one thing you think that someone can really do to move out of that short-term thinking? I mean, I know we talked a bit about, trying to visualize it in one way or another, whether it's writing your CV a few years down the line or having some things written down. But I guess it's another book I've been reading recently is a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And he talks a lot about actually you're not your thoughts, and it's trying to sort of manage the way you react to the thoughts that come and go in your head. And rather than thinking, okay, if a thought pops up, then this is who you are, taking a few breaths and realizing that actually just because something's popped in your head doesn't mean to say you have to do it or say it or act on it. And so I know that things like meditation and yoga and so on have become a lot more popular now, again, over the COVID period, linked into this kind of trying to think more and spend more time on yourself. I mean, is there anything you can advise people to try and move away from the short-term thinking? Is a practice you say would really stand out from your point of view?
Well, I think there's a variety of things that we can do, but one starting place, Paul, that I think is useful is to actually to begin to take the steps to feel okay about running our own race. And here's what I mean by that. One of the quotes that I discovered in the course of researching the long game was by H.L. Mencken, who about 100 years ago was this kind of humorist in America. And one of his quotes that I loved was that the definition of wealth and of success is anybody who makes $100 a year more than your brother-in-law. And I love that, because it's like, yeah, if you're for most people, if you're doing better than your comparison group, it's like, yeah, rock on. And if your brother-in-law is making more money, it's like, oh God, I'm a failure. It's terrible. But the problem 100 years later is it's not just your brother-in-law. The entire world, thanks to social media, has become your brother-in-law, whether it's your elementary school classmate, your college classmate, your coworkers, Kim Kardashian, like literally anybody on the internet becomes this point of comparison. And, it can be very challenging for people to feel okay that if they are pursuing something that, if it seems like other people are getting there faster or doing it better, it can really cause significant doubt. And, I do a lot of executive coaching work, and I work with people who are very senior in their careers. They're very successful in their careers, on sort of an objective standards. And yet I would talk to them, we'd have our sessions every couple of weeks or every month. And part of what really inspired me to write the book was that almost every session, they'd kind of give me the update, they'd give me the report about what they're doing. And then they would just sort of sit there and they'd be like, so what next? What should I be doing? And they'd sort of be like waiting for me to, like an oracle to reveal, now it's TikTok, go forth and do TikTok, whatever it was. And of course, that is not what I did. And I think a part of them was disappointed that I didn't have this kind of silver bullet to hand them. And, they're smart people, so they sort of get it. But I felt like, oh, wow, I'm like the most boring coach in the world, because I was basically like, what you should be doing is what we talked about before, which is your plan. You need to be executing your plan. Remember that plan we came up with 3 months ago or 6 months ago? Keep doing that. And so I think that some of what is hardest for all of us is, even if we quote unquote know better, is that there's kind of a part of us that is looking for the magic bullet. And we have to realize that a lot of success is just grinding. It's, it doesn't mean that it's dispiriting and boring and terrible, but it means that you have to have the patience to keep doing the same thing, because things do take a while to work. I mean, you could create the world's best blog, let's say, but I guarantee you, even if it's going to turn into the world's best blog, 3 months into your blogging, you're probably not going to have very much to show for it. There might be an enormous amount of promise and progress and things like that. But in 3 months, are you going to have 1 million readers? In 3 months, are you going to have a bunch of corporate sponsors? Probably not. That is what happens after years, not after just a handful of experimentation. So a lot of it is just having the encouragement and the fortitude and the character to stick with it.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. And I think you mentioned that the hard work side of it is something that, all the other things that are talked about when you look at the successful people and what they've achieved, the one thing that all of them have in common without any doubt is they've all worked hard to get where they are. You might get elements of luck through the process, but you've usually worked hard to bring you to that piece of luck in the first place. And it's something that's, I guess it's not very fashionable to say, but it is, it is one of those things that, the success usually comes to the people that work the hardest, just like, the top scorers in football, the ones that shoot the most for the goal. It is the way it is. You have a lot of failures, but the successes come as a result of it. And I think, one of the other things you actually mentioned at the start of that answer was there being, true to yourself and being authentic. And I know, obviously, as part of your work, being a top 50 thinker, and you also been a former US presidential campaign spokeswoman as well. So you've been very kind of busy on the promotions fronts and the work you're doing. And I was just wondering, one of the things that we know is important to you is about being authentic and having a personal narrative. But I also know from speaking to other people and my own journey that when you start to talk too much about think who you are as a person and the challenges you go through, it's quite an area that pushes you out of your comfort zone. So how did you kind of get through that? Because it's one of those things that I think a lot of people are often in awe of, if people can stand up and talk about who they are and be authentic to themselves. So I just wondered how you approached that when you first started out in this, really.
Well, thank you, Paul. I mean, I think authenticity is a topic in business that certainly has gotten a lot of airtime and has different responses, right? Because you have one camp that's like, yes, authenticity at all costs. This is the most important value in business. We can't hide our light under a bushel, and then you have the camp of people. Adam Grant has written about this. Jeffrey Pfeffer has written about this, and I think they are right. I think that actually the pieces are closer together than we might think. But what they say is like, no, bad form. Don't prize authenticity. We don't need that, because that is the thing. What you need is to be politically adept. And if you're all, so solipsistically focused on I'm being me, I'm doing me, then you're not, fitting in properly into the context in which you operate. I don't think that's wrong. I think that there is an important middle ground to it, which is the way that I would define it is, yes, you should be authentic, of course, in the sense that, it's not helpful for anyone to be like hiding elements of themselves or worrying about that. I mean, there's been plenty of studies that have been done by the Center for Talent Innovation and others talking about things like, perhaps surprisingly, even in homophobic environments, that like for LGBT employees, that out employees perform much better than closeted employees, largely because they are not dealing with the psychological burdens of being like, what do they think about me? Do they know? Which is very draining, obviously. So you just, we get rid of all that, yes, be authentic in that way. But I think that the key point, the way that I think about it, is that your authenticity, to the extent that we're performing it, that we're manifesting it, always needs to be in service of other people. It does get boring. It does get tiresome if people are talking about themselves just to hear themselves talk. Nobody wants that. Nobody needs that. It doesn't matter, whatever your race or your sexuality or your demographics, no one cares. But if you're able to be authentic in the sense of sharing yourself in a way that is helpful to other people, then I think that is really quite powerful. And so, for instance, let's say that you are mentoring employees and somebody comes to you and they're like, oh, wow, I'm really nervous about this project. I've never done this before. I don't know if I can do it. That would be a moment when it would actually be really good and really appropriate for you to say, you know what? Earlier in my career, I felt the same thing. I had an experience where I did blah, 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 blah. And oh my gosh, I didn't know if I could succeed, but here's how I thought about it. And here's what I tried. And, it turns out it worked in the end. And, all of a sudden that person feels encouraged. They feel supportive. You've given them hopefully useful information, but, at a minimum, you've empathized with them enough so that they say, oh, wow, I can get through this. I thought this person, was like perfect. I mean, they're like an SVP now. I can't believe that they felt insecure about that. And that is actually making yourself useful in a corporate environment. And so I think that authenticity through the lens of how do we be kind and helpful to other people is always a useful thing.
Mm. No, it's really, really true. And I think you often see now that when it comes to people's careers, the companies that have got the best retention, or the teams that have the best retention are where the manager it has a very empathetic approach and it is a very good listener, which is something that the listening skill is something that often gets overlooked. It's very rare that I interview somebody and you ask them what their three strengths are. It's very rare someone says they're a good listener, you know. And I know actually rather seamlessly you were doing something a few days ago on how to be a better listener, and given that that's linked into the being empathetic as well. I thought I'd just ask you a bit about that recent event you were on. If there's any tips you give people on the listening skills as well, really.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was having a great conversation with my colleague, Dr. Mark Goulston, about that topic. And he also is very knowledgeable about it. And listening is something that I have spent a lot of time thinking about. I'm actually working on a pretty extensive project with Microsoft right now on that topic as well, which is exciting. But, I think that so often where we go awry with listening is just at a really basic level. Sometimes it's because of a profusion of enthusiasm. And I think, mostly, we can do better, but you can't really fault somebody. It's like, oh my God, I'm so excited. I have to tell you about the blah, 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 But I think that where a lack of listening becomes pernicious and where we really have to sort of excavate ourselves. I mean, like a lot of things, being a better listener actually, it's not just the technical skills of like, oh, well, Paul, just pause 15 seconds after every question, or, whatever. Like yes, people can get this like mechanical thing, but the truth is we have to understand ourselves and understand our motivations first, because for a lot of people, there's reasons they're not listening. One reason they might not be listening is that they feel insecure in that situation. And they feel like, oh, I have to show this person I'm smart. And the way I show them I'm smart is that I tell them a lot of things and then they'll know I'm smart. And it's like, if you actually like lay that out, it's like, oh no, that's a really terrible strategy. But a lot of people are operating on that implicitly. So we have to understand, let's get at that. Let's scrape that away. This need to prove ourselves, because if we can be more confident and comfortable with ourselves, then we actually give space for other people to be smart. We give space for other people to tell us what they think. And we don't have to be in this endless race of like proving ourselves and, feeling bad about, oh God, I can't listen because I have to concentrate on what I'm going to say next. People are just honestly not that interested. Like it's not like they're so consciously evaluating you like, oh, is this a smart response or not? Really, it matters a lot more to them if you seem to be present and you seem to be plugged in. So we've got to just let go of that and realize that probably the best way that you can actually show someone that you're smart is to take enough care with them that you really are paying attention.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's really true. And I mean, because you often find that when you have conversations with people, and let's say you've been listening 80% of the time, you'll often find the person who's been talking most of the time is the one who finds the conversation went better. So actually by being quiet, and asking the relevant questions as you're going along, the other person often gets the more out of the conversation just as you do as well. So it actually ends up working quite well on both sides, I think. But it's and it's always one of those things that I find quite interesting, especially given what everyone's going through and trying to work remotely as well. I know that's been a challenge, trying to listen more and be empathetic to what people are going through. But now we're sort of getting back to a bit more normality. I mean, we're recording this at the end of June, and things are starting to get a bit more normal now. Travel's coming around. People are starting to talk about their long-term career goals a bit more. And I thought we couldn't really have a podcast on the recruitment podcast without asking you something recruitment related. And I know that fairly recently you wrote an article around making progress in long-term career goals, and we've talked about the contact you had that sort of rewrote his CV 5 years in advance. But I didn't know if there's any top tips you think that would be good to share with the network about making progress on long-term career goals.
Yeah, I thank you, Paul. I think one misconception, honestly, that a lot of people have about long-term career goals is that if they don't know precisely how something would be achieved, that they can't even have that as a career goal. And I really want to push back on that because ironically, the sort of bigger the goal, the further out the goal, the more I think it's perfectly acceptable to have no idea how you'll get there. And here's what I mean by that. I mean, obviously, if you have a goal and it's like, oh, well, by 6 months from now, I'm going to get this, completely great, new job or something like that. Okay. If your timeline is 6 months, you better have a pretty good plan for yourself. But if we're talking 10 years, 20 years, I mean, think about all the butterflies that are flapping their wings, right? Like even if you thought that you could map out your exact route to there, you can't. There's a million things, including pandemics, that can happen that literally no one could have predicted. And so it's pure hubris to imagine that we could know every step. You can have hypotheses, absolutely, but the goal is to have a hypothesis and then continually update it with new information. And so I think that oftentimes we keep ourselves from dreaming big because, and having a sort of impressive large goal because we say, oh, I just don't even know how I'd do that. I don't know how I'd get there. That's actually fine because by creating it, all you really need to know is what is the next step. And as long as you keep working toward it in whatever way you know how to at this moment, if you continually do that, then you may or may not get to the goal. That is true, but you are going to get a lot closer than you would if you had not articulated it and been working toward it, but also a lot closer than you might even imagine because new opportunities will present themselves and you will be extremely attuned to looking for them. If your goal is, I want to be an ambassador, all of a sudden, anytime you come across somebody that, oh, they worked in the Foreign Service or, oh, they were an ambassador or, oh, their spouse was an ambassador or whatever, you're going to say, oh, tell me more. And that's the moment where you get to upgrade your understanding and get an even better sense of what the next step is, or maybe even, who knows, what the next 5 steps are so that you can take the leap forward.
No, it's true. And I guess really, I did have a question lined up to ask you as the kind of final question of the podcast, but I'm actually going to change it given the answer that you've just given. I suppose it makes sense to ask you what the next step is for you. We've been talking about the next step in career. You've obviously just got the new book out, so maybe you're not thinking the next step just yet, but anything in mind for you now?
Well, it's true. You raise an excellent point because I have this new book. I think, in order to be not hypocritical in writing a book called The Long Game, part of what I consciously have decided is that in order to be able to sufficiently give this book the push that it needs over time, I think sometimes a mistake that people make, I have made this personally in previous times, I've really been of the mind, oh, well, the best way to promote your past book is to write a new book. I don't think that's true anymore. I think the best way to promote your book is to promote your book. And so I am intending to, continue for the next 4 years to really push this book to hopefully make it a mainstay in the business literature. That is my immediate goal. But above and beyond that, you're right that I also do like to have stretch goals. And so something that I came up with for myself in 2016, which was a 10-year goal at the time, so I continue to be working toward it, is that I wanted to develop a new muscle for myself. And so I decided that I wanted to learn to write musical theater. And so that is what I have been doing since 2016. I have been accepted to and completed a fairly prestigious musical theater training program run by the publishing company BMI. And I've now written one complete musical. I have written, I'm sort of partway through a couple of other musicals, and the complete musical, which is called Absolute Zero, is actually going to have a semi-staged reading, which is one of the steps along the way to development, this summer in Dallas. So It is moving forward, and it takes some effort and it takes some luck. But my goal that has been to try to write a show that can be produced on Broadway in the 2026 season. So that's what I'm aiming for.
Well, it feels like you've got to tell us a bit more about this. So tell us a bit more about the show. What's are you able to tell us much about it, or is it top secret at the moment?
Oh, well, it is only top secret, Paul, in the sense that it is a spy musical. So we're very on point there. It's a sort of exciting modern rendering. I like to I basically say it's picture James Bond as a lady.
And that could be something we see soon as well. You never know. They've not announced the next James Bond either, so it's that could be. That's
right. But yes, public, you'll see it first in Absolute Zero. So stay tuned.
That's really cool. I mean, our son is 9 years old, and he watches a lot of things like the Lion King and these kind of things. So constantly got the kind of musicals in the back of my head, from what's on the TV and whatever at home. So they're great things to hear. So yeah, I mean that's awesome. So it is definitely another string to the bow on that side. Wow, that's pretty cool. So you're out there promoting the two things back to back. That's it. So no, but it's been awesome to speak to you. I really appreciate your time. I thought you were busy before the podcast, but now we talked about what you got going on. I realised you're even busier than what I thought. So it's great to have this time with you. I mean, obviously, if anyone wants to reach out, to connect, to reach out about the book, about what you got coming up, is the best way they can reach out to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. For folks who are interested in learning more about my work or about the long game, I do have a free resource, which is the Long Game Strategic Thinking Self-Assessment. And folks can download that for free at dorieclark.com/thelonggame. And it is a pretty detailed self-assessment to help you think through how you can be even more strategic in your own life and career. Of course, folks can always find me on my website at dorieclark.com.
Excellent. That's great to hear. And I was wondering, any chance you're going to be in Europe at some point in the next couple of years? Have you got anything lined up?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm very excited to have the opportunity to come back hopefully soon. I was just in the Netherlands and in Germany a few weeks ago. I was giving a talk for Handelsblatt, the German economic newspaper, at a Future of Work conference they were doing, which was really fantastic. So far, that's my only European trip this year, but I look forward to more. And every other year, of course, they do the Thinkers 50 celebration in London. That is I guess technically scheduled to be on for 2023. And so, God willing, if international travel is still a thing by then, last year it was virtual, but hopefully in 2023, it will be once again held in London. And I will look forward to being back for that. I went in 2019, which was my last trip to London, and it was my birthday week, so it was great. Cool. I did Thinkers 50 conference, and then I went to Bath, and I spent my birthday doing Roman baths, which was a fantastic way to spend your birthday. So I was very enthused about that.
Awesome. That sounds it. Yeah, it's great. I mean, we'll obviously hopefully welcome you back into London or Europe at some point again soon. And I know the listeners will take a lot from the discussion today, so no doubt they'll start following you and be aware of when you're next over here. So huge thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it. I've taken a lot from it. I know the network will as well. So all the best for the promotion of the new book, the promotion of the musical, and we'll keep our eyes open for all these exciting things coming around the corner.
Paul, what a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye. You too. Bye-bye.